Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for new stories. It started with a streak of fire splitting the night sky. Jake Harris had been nursing a lukewarm beer on his porch, the soft hum of crickets filling the air. The stars, scattered like diamonds across the inky blackness, had always been a comfort, a constant reminder that the universe was vast and his problems small. But tonight, the universe felt closer, far too close. A blinding flash turned night to day. The roar that followed rattled the windows of his small house, and the ground shook under his feet. Jake bolted upright, nearly knocking over his drink. His pulse quickened as a plume of fire erupted beyond the tree line at the far end of his yard. What in the... It wasn't thunder, and it wasn't a plane. Jake knew enough about crashes to recognize that much. Whatever had fallen wasn't anything he could name. Grabbing his flashlight and an old shotgun from the wall, he hurried toward the source of the commotion. Rationality whispered it was probably a meteor, but Jake's gut said otherwise. His boots crunched through the dry grass, the faint smell of burning metal growing stronger with every step. When he reached the edge of the crater, he froze. The craft, if you could call it that, was sleek, alien in design. Its surface shimmered unnaturally, reflecting the moonlight in waves. Smoke hissed from deep cracks along its hull, and strange, glowing symbols pulsed faintly. It didn't look like it belonged to any country on Earth. Jake's stomach tightened. He scanned the wreckage, his flashlight beam cutting through the smoke. And then he saw her. A figure emerged from the ruined craft, stumbling onto the scorched grass. She was tall, easily over 6 feet, with a powerful, commanding presence even in her weakened state. Her armor was jagged and dark, like something out of a sci-fi movie, and it clung to her muscular frame. Her helmet was cracked, revealing sharp, angular features and glowing green eyes that seemed to pierce the night. Jake took a step back, raising the shotgun instinctively. "Stay back," he barked, his voice shaky but firm. The figure staggered, clutching her side. Blood, or something like it, seeped between her fingers, glowing faintly in the dark. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. When she spoke, it wasn't in any language Jake had ever heard. Her words were sharp and guttural, like a mix of growls and clicks. He tightened his grip on the shotgun. "I said stay back." The figure swayed, her strength clearly failing. She raised an arm toward him, and Jake flinched, expecting an attack. But instead, her voice softened, and a device on her wrist emitted a mechanical hum. "Help," the device translated in a cold, robotic tone. Jake hesitated, his mind racing. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. But the desperation in her glowing eyes was undeniable. Before he could decide what to do, she collapsed onto the ground. Jake stood there, heart pounding, his flashlight beam fixed on her motionless form. What the hell was he supposed to do? Call the cops? The military? He glanced back at the craft, its eerie glow fading as the smoke thickened. No, this was way beyond any of them. A shadow passed over the moon, and Jake's breath caught. Looking up, he saw another shape in the sky, sleek and silent, circling like a predator. He didn't know what it was, but he knew enough to recognize danger. Whatever this woman had brought to his yard wasn't finished with her yet. "Damn it," he muttered, lowering the shotgun. Moving quickly, he slung the weapon over his shoulder and crouched beside her. Up close, she looked even more intimidating, her features sharp and alien, yet strangely human. Her armor was scorched, and her breathing was shallow. "All right, lady," Jake grumbled, more to himself than her. "Let's get you out of here before your friends show up." With a grunt, he lifted her onto his shoulder. She was heavier than she looked, her armor adding to the weight. Jake staggered slightly but managed to carry her toward his workshop. The building was a large, cluttered structure just behind his house, filled with half-finished projects, tools, and spare parts. Jake laid her on the workbench, clearing away the junk with a sweep of his arm. Okay, he said, catching his breath. Let's see what we're dealing with. He examined her cautiously. The device on her wrist glowed faintly, and her chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. Whatever she wasn't a robot. Her injuries looked bad: burns, deep cuts, and that strange glowing blood pooling on the workbench. Reaching for his toolbox, Jake hesitated. How do you patch up an alien? He grabbed a clean rag and a bottle of alcohol, figuring it was better than nothing. As he worked, the device on her wrist emitted a low hum, and her eyes flickered open. Jake froze as her gaze locked onto his. You're awake, he said, his voice tight. She winced, her hand moving to the device on her wrist. The mechanical voice spoke again, clearer this time. Who are you? It asked. Jake, he said cautiously. I'm Jake. You crashed in my yard. Now, who are you? She studied him for a moment before replying. Kilira, the device translated. I need your help. Jake frowned. Help? With what? Fixing your ship. Kilira nodded weakly. Yes. Ship. Repair. Enemy, coming. Jake's stomach sank. He glanced toward the door, half expecting that shadow to descend at any moment. What kind of enemy? Her expression darkened. Zelarn. Hunters. Killers. They will destroy. Jake didn't need more convincing. Whatever this Zelarn was, he didn't want them anywhere near his home, or Earth, for that matter. All right, he said, grabbing his wrench. Let's fix your ship. But you're gonna owe me an explanation when this is over. Kilira managed a faint nod, her glowing eyes filled with gratitude, and something else. Hope. As Jake set to work, he couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet life had just become a lot more complicated. The workshop was alive with activity, though much of it was beyond Jake's comprehension. Sparks flew as Kilira's wrist device interfaced with the remnants of her damaged ship. Holographic displays projected alien schematics into the air, symbols and diagrams spinning in patterns that made Jake's head hurt. He had always prided himself on his mechanical skills, but this was another level entirely. Jake scratched his head, glancing between the diagrams and the strange tools Kilira had salvaged from her armor. I'm good with engines and hydraulics, lady, Jake muttered, but quantum hypercores or whatever this is? That's a bit outside my wheelhouse. Kilira, sitting upright on the workbench despite her injuries, tilted her head slightly. Her translator hummed. Hypercore, not difficult. We'll guide you. Jake rolled his eyes. Sure. Let me just grab my alien tech repair manual. Kilira didn't seem to catch the sarcasm. She leaned over, her hands shaking slightly as she picked up a cylindrical tool. Pressing a button, she revealed a holographic blueprint of her ship. Here, she said. Engine core fractured. Containment failing. Repair, critical. Jake stared at the projection, recognizing enough to understand the stakes. So if this containment fails, what happens? A little smoke. Some sparks. Kilira's glowing green eyes fixed on him. Explosion. Large. Destroy your home. Your town. Jake's jaw tightened. Right. No pressure. He set to work, following Kilira's instructions as best as he could. The alien tech was surprisingly intuitive once he got the hang of it, but every step brought new challenges. The tools felt strange in his hands, humming with a faint energy. The materials were unlike anything he'd ever seen, lighter than air yet impossibly strong. As he worked, Kilira occasionally chimed in, her voice softened by exhaustion. You are skilled, she said at one point. Jake snorted. Yeah, well, fixing lawnmowers and tractor engines doesn't exactly prepare you for this. What about you? Can't you just use your tech to patch this up yourself? Kilira's expression darkened. Wounded. Cannot focus. Need time to heal. Jake paused, glancing at her. The glowing blood from earlier had stopped, but she still looked pale, well, paler than before. Right. Sorry. Guess you've had a rougher night than me. Kilira didn't respond, her gaze drifting toward the hologram. Jake followed her line of sight and noticed a cluster of red dots hovering near the edge of the display. What's that? He asked. Zelarn, she said, her voice tinged with urgency. Hunters. Tracking me. Jake's stomach twisted. Great. And how long until they get here? Hours. Perhaps less. Of course, Jake muttered. He tightened a bolt on the containment unit, trying to suppress the rising panic. They worked in tense silence for a while, the weight of the looming threat hanging over them. Every so often, Jake caught Kilira watching him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. What? He finally asked, not looking up from his work. You surprise me, she said after a moment. Jake frowned. How so? You help, Kilira said simply. No hesitation. Many of your kind would run. Jake sighed, leaning back. Lady, you dropped out of the sky into my yard, bleeding and desperate. What was I supposed to do? Leave you there? She tilted her head, considering this. Many would. Well, I'm not many, Jake said, a little harsher than he intended. Kilira didn't reply, but her expression softened, and she returned to studying the schematics. As the hours dragged on, the two of them fell into an uneasy rhythm. Kilira provided instructions while Jake did the heavy lifting, adjusting components and rewiring circuits with a mix of human tools and alien ingenuity. The translator filled the air with Kilira's clipped commands, and Jake's occasional grumbles added a touch of humanity to the otherwise surreal scene. Then came the sound that neither of them wanted to hear, a high-pitched whine, faint but unmistakable. Jake froze. What the hell is that? Kilira's eyes narrowed. She grabbed a small device from her belt, and the translator chimed. Zelarn drone. Scouting. Jake's blood ran cold. Scouting? Like, it's looking for you. Kilira nodded, her movements quick and deliberate as she activated a scanner on her wrist device. A holographic display lit up, showing a small, spherical object hovering just beyond the tree line. We have to destroy it, she said. Destroy it? With what? Jake gestured around the workshop. I don't exactly have anti-drone weapons lying around. Kilira frowned, her glowing eyes scanning the room. Improvised. Your tools. Combine with this. She handed him a small, cylindrical device from her belt. It was cold to the touch and hummed faintly in his hand. Jake raised an eyebrow. You're seriously asking me to MacGyver a weapon out of this? Quickly, Kilira urged, glancing at the hologram. The drone was getting closer. Jake muttered a string of curses but got to work. Using duct tape, a wrench, and the alien device, he cobbled together something that resembled a makeshift taser. Kilira adjusted the settings on the device, her fingers trembling slightly but steady enough to finish the job. Done, she said, handing it back to him. Jake stared at the contraption, then at her. You're the warrior. Why aren't you doing this? Wounded, she reminded him. You must act. Jake groaned. Fine. But if I get fried doing this, I'm haunting you. He stepped outside, his heart pounding as he scanned the darkness. The faint whine grew louder, and he spotted the drone hovering near the edge of the yard. It was small but menacing, its smooth surface reflecting the moonlight. Taking a deep breath, Jake crept closer, holding the makeshift weapon like a live grenade. When he was close enough, he aimed and pressed the button. The device let out a high-pitched screech, and a burst of energy shot out, striking the drone dead center. Sparks flew as the drone convulsed and crashed to the ground in a smoking heap. Jake exhaled sharply, his hands shaking. Holy hell! Kilira appeared behind him, her movements silent despite her injuries. She examined the wreckage and nodded approvingly. Well done, the translator said. Jake gave a shaky laugh. Yeah, sure. Let's not make a habit of this, all right? But Kilira's expression remained grim. They will know. More will come. Jake swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling on him. The Zelarn weren't just coming for her, they were coming for anyone who stood in their way. Then we'd better get that ship fixed, Jake said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. Kilira nodded. We must hurry. Time is short. As they returned to the workshop, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet, uneventful life had just become the front line of a battle far bigger than he could have imagined. The whine of the drone was gone, but its presence lingered like a shadow in Jake's mind. Every noise, branches creaking in the wind, the distant call of an owl, felt like a harbinger of something worse. The Zelarn weren't just a threat now, they were a ticking clock. Inside the workshop, Kilira's condition had worsened. Her glowing blood had started seeping through the makeshift bandages Jake had wrapped around her earlier, staining her dark armor with a faint luminescence. Despite her obvious pain, she worked tirelessly, guiding Jake through repairs to her ship's hypercore. The holographic schematics pulsed with alien symbols, the faint hum of Kilira's wrist device filling the room. Jake's hands moved with a precision born of necessity, tightening bolts, aligning conduits, and carefully sealing fractures with a strange gel Kilira had produced from her armor. Hold this steady, she instructed, her voice rasping as she passed him a crystalline rod. Jake took it, his grip firm despite the sweat slicking his palms. This thing gonna blow up in my face if I sneeze wrong. Kilira managed a faint smile. Unlikely. Unless, misaligned. Great. No pressure. They worked in tense silence, each of them painfully aware of the stakes. Jake occasionally glanced at Kilira, noting the way her hands trembled or the way her breaths came in shallow gasps. You sure you're okay? He asked at one point. Kilira nodded, though her glowing eyes betrayed her fatigue. I will endure. Jake frowned. He didn't know much about alien biology, but he knew she wasn't going to last much longer without proper medical attention. Still, she was their only hope of finishing the repairs in time. As they secured the last piece of the hypercore, Kilira leaned back against the workbench, her shoulders slumping. Core stable. Containment, restored. Jake exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That's good, right? So we're done. Kilira shook her head. Core operational. Systems, offline. Must restore controls. Jake ran a hand through his hair. You're killing me, lady. How much more is there to do? Kilira didn't answer. Instead, her gaze snapped toward the door, her body tensing. Jake followed her line of sight, his stomach dropping as he heard it, the faint, rhythmic thrum of approaching engines. They're here, aren't they? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kilira nodded, her expression grim. Zelarn scouts. They will search for me. Jake grabbed the shotgun he'd left propped against the wall. It felt laughably inadequate against whatever advanced weapons the Zelarn might have, but it was better than nothing. What's the plan? He asked. Kilira's glowing eyes flicked between him and the half-repaired ship. Delay them. Protect ship. I will, fight. Jake snorted. Fight? You can barely stand. Kilira straightened, her jaw tightening. I will fight, she repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. Before Jake could protest further, a brilliant beam of light cut through the darkness outside, sweeping over the yard. He ducked instinctively, pulling Kilira down with him. The beam illuminated a group of figures emerging from the tree line. They were tall, sleek, and terrifyingly alien, their angular armor glinting in the moonlight. Each of them carried a weapon that looked far more advanced than anything Jake had ever seen. "Zelarn," Kilira said, her voice a low growl. Jake's grip tightened on the shotgun. "Tell me you've got a plan, Kilira. Preferably one that doesn't end with us as alien roadkill." Kilira activated her wrist device, and a small compartment in her armor opened, revealing a sleek, black cylinder. She handed it to Jake. "Use this," she said. "Aim for their weapons." Jake examined the device, noting its glowing energy core. "What is it?" "Pulse grenade," Kilira explained. "Disables technology. Limited range." Jake nodded, a grim determination settling over him. "All right. Let's give these bastards a warm welcome." The Zelarn moved with military precision, spreading out as they advanced toward the workshop. Their weapons hummed ominously, the sound sending a chill down Jake's spine. Kilira moved to the side of the door, her movements fluid despite her injuries. She drew a blade from her armor, its edge crackling with energy. "Wait for my signal," she said. Jake crouched behind the workbench, clutching the pulse grenade in one hand and the shotgun in the other. His heart pounded in his chest as the Zelarn closed in, their footfalls eerily silent. When the first figure reached the doorway, Kilira struck. She moved like a force of nature, her blade slicing through the air with deadly precision. The Zelarn barely had time to react before she disarmed them, literally. Sparks flew as their weapon clattered to the ground, and Kilira's blade found its mark. The others sprang into action, their weapons firing beams of searing energy. Jake ducked as one of the beams scorched a line across the workbench. "Now!" Kilira shouted. Jake didn't hesitate. He hurled the pulse grenade into the middle of the group. It detonated with a blinding flash, sending out a shockwave of crackling energy. The Zelarn's weapons sputtered and died, their sleek armor flickering as their systems shorted out. Taking advantage of the chaos, Jake fired his shotgun at the nearest Zelarn. The buckshot didn't penetrate their armor, but it was enough to knock them off balance. Kilira pressed the attack, her blade moving in a blur. Despite her injuries, she fought with a ferocity that left Jake in awe. But the Zelarn weren't easily defeated. One of them managed to land a blow, sending Kilira crashing into the workbench. Jake's stomach dropped as he saw her crumple to the ground, her blade skittering out of reach. "Kilira," he shouted, firing another shot at the advancing Zelarn. She groaned, struggling to push herself up. "Finish, repairs," she rasped. "I will hold them." Jake hesitated, torn between helping her and completing the ship. The Zelarn were relentless, and the odds were against them. But Kilira's glowing eyes met his, filled with a determination that brooked no argument. "Go," she commanded. Swallowing his fear, Jake bolted toward the ship, his mind racing. The fate of everything, his home, his world, rested on their ability to get the ship operational before the Zelarn overwhelmed them. As he worked frantically to restore the ship's systems, the sounds of battle raged behind him. Kilira's defiant cries echoed through the workshop, a testament to her unyielding spirit. But Jake knew time was running out, for both of them. Kilira's cries of defiance echoed in Jake's ears as he dove into the ship's cockpit. Sweat dripped down his face as he scanned the array of alien controls. The interface was a mix of glowing panels and holographic displays, none of which made any sense to him. "All right, Jake," he muttered to himself, "you've rebuilt tractor engines with duct tape and a prayer. You can figure this out." Kilira's voice crackled through the workshop. "Focus, on primary systems. Central console." Jake glanced over his shoulder. Through the broken door, he could see her fighting off the Zelarn. Despite her injuries, she moved with a brutal elegance, her energy blade carving through the enemy with precision. But there were too many of them, and for every one she took down, another stepped forward. "Central console," Jake repeated, snapping himself back to the task at hand. The central holographic display flickered to life as he pressed the largest panel. Alien symbols scrolled across the screen, accompanied by a series of beeps and clicks. "What am I looking at here?" he called out. Kilira ducked under a Z-Larn strike, countering with a devastating upward slash. Reactor controls. Power distribution. Override, manual systems. Clear as mud, Jake grumbled. He started pressing buttons at random, hoping something would work. A low hum filled the air, and the ship's lights flickered to life. The holographic display shifted, showing a schematic of the vessel. A pulsing red light indicated the damaged hypercore, while yellow warnings flashed over other parts of the ship. "Power's on!" Jake shouted. Kilira parried another strike, her blade colliding with a Z-Larn weapon in a shower of sparks. "Stabilize, core. Activate, shields." Jake turned back to the console, his hands moving frantically over the controls. The symbols shifted and rearranged, forming a pattern that looked vaguely like a flowchart. He followed the glowing lines to a section labeled with an unfamiliar symbol and pressed it. The ship vibrated beneath him, and a series of glowing rings appeared around the holographic core. The red light turned to orange, then green. "Core stabilized," he called out. Kilira grunted in response, her movements slowing as the Z-Larn pressed their advantage. Jake scanned the console for the shield controls. His eyes landed on a symbol that resembled a bubble. "Please be what I think you are," he muttered, pressing it. A faint shimmer enveloped the ship, and a low hum indicated the activation of the shields. Kilira's translator crackled. "Good work." The Z-Larn seemed to realize the shift in the battle. One of them barked something in their guttural language, and the remaining warriors focused their efforts on Kilira. "Kilira!" Jake shouted. She stumbled under the onslaught, her blade barely deflecting the blows raining down on her. One Z-Larn landed a strike on her shoulder, sending her crashing to the ground. "Damn it!" Jake grabbed the shotgun and bolted out of the cockpit. The Z-Larn nearest Kilira raised their weapon, aiming for a killing blow. Without thinking, Jake fired. The blast hit the Z-Larn in the side, staggering them. It wasn't enough to pierce their armor, but it gave Kilira the opening she needed. With a roar, she drove her blade upward, piercing through the Z-Larn's chest. Jake fired again, keeping the remaining enemies at bay as he rushed to Kilira's side. She was breathing heavily, her armor scorched and cracked. "Can you stand?" he asked, pulling her arm over his shoulder. Kilira nodded weakly. "Help me, inside." Together, they staggered back into the workshop, the Z-Larn regrouping outside. Jake lowered her onto a workbench and grabbed the makeshift pulse weapon they'd built earlier. "We can't hold them off forever," he said. "What's the next move?" Kilira's eyes fluttered open, her voice barely audible. "Ship, weapons. Use them." Jake's stomach sank. "You're saying the ship has guns?" Kilira managed a faint smile. "More than guns. Armory, aboard." Jake stared at her, then at the half-repaired ship. "You're telling me this thing's packing an arsenal, and you waited until now to mention it?" Kilira's smile widened slightly. "Focus, on survival." Jake didn't waste any more time. He sprinted back to the cockpit and scanned the controls. A section of the holographic display labeled with a series of sharp, angular symbols caught his attention. It glowed red, indicating it was offline. "Come on," he muttered, pressing the panel. The display flickered, and a new schematic appeared, showing a series of mounted weapons along the ship's hull. A sequence of beeps indicated the systems coming online. Outside, the Z-Larn began advancing again, their weapons trained on the ship. Jake gritted his teeth and pressed the largest glowing button. The ship's weapons roared to life. Energy cannons mounted along the sides fired in rapid succession, cutting through the Z-Larn ranks with devastating precision. Explosions lit up the night as the attackers scrambled for cover. Jake let out a whoop of triumph. "That's what you get for messing with Earth." Kilira's voice crackled through the translator. "Good work. Keep firing." Jake continued to unleash the ship's arsenal, targeting the remaining Zeelarn with a mix of energy blasts and pulse waves. One by one, the attackers fell, their weapons useless against the onslaught. When the last Zeelarn dropped, silence fell over the yard. Smoke and debris littered the ground, and the faint hum of the ship's systems was the only sound. Jake slumped back in the cockpit, his hands shaking. Kilira's voice came through the translator again, softer this time. "You saved us." Jake chuckled weakly. "Yeah, well, let's not make a habit of it." He climbed out of the ship and returned to the workshop, where Kilira was still lying on the workbench. Her breathing was shallow, but she managed a faint smile as he approached. "You fought, well," she said. Jake shrugged. "Just doing what I had to. What about you? You gonna be alright?" Kilira nodded slowly. "Need time to heal. Ship needs repairs." Jake sighed, glancing at the wreckage outside. "Looks like we've got a lot of work ahead of us." Kilira's smile widened. "Together, we will succeed." For the first time since the night began, Jake felt a flicker of hope. The battle wasn't over, but they had survived, and for now, that was enough. The aftermath of the battle was a strange mix of eerie quiet and chaotic cleanup. Jake had never seen anything like it. Smoldering craters dotted his once pristine yard, alien bodies sprawled in lifeless heaps, and the ship stood like a wounded beast, its shields flickering sporadically. Kilira lay on the workbench, her face pale, her breath shallow but steady. The glowing veins across her skin pulsed faintly, an indication of her regenerative abilities, or so Jake hoped. He sat beside her, exhaustion weighing on him like a lead blanket. "Hey," he said softly. "You hanging in there?" Kilira's glowing eyes opened a fraction, the barest flicker of a smile playing on her lips. "You fight well, Earthman." Jake snorted. "Yeah, well, I'd rather be terrible at it and not have to fight at all." "What happens now?" Kilira shifted slightly, wincing. "We rebuild. Prepare for retaliation." "Retaliation?" Jake asked, his heart sinking. "I thought we just took out their team." Kilira's expression hardened. "This was a scout force. More will come." Jake rubbed a hand over his face. "Of course. Why wouldn't there be more alien death squads coming to kill us?" Kilira struggled to sit up, her movements sluggish. "We have advantage, for now. Ship weapons, operational. Must complete repairs." Jake stood and offered her a hand. "All right. Let's get to work before your buddies decide to send another welcoming party." Kilira hesitated before accepting his help, her hand surprisingly warm despite her weakened state. She leaned heavily on him as they moved toward the ship, her steps slow and deliberate. Inside, the ship was a maze of technology Jake couldn't begin to comprehend. Glowing panels lined the walls, displaying alien symbols that pulsed in rhythm with the ship's systems. "What do we need to fix first?" Jake asked, setting Kilira down in a chair near the central console. "Communications," Kilira said, her voice steadier now. "Must call allies." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You've got allies? Why didn't you mention that before?" Kilira met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Not all, trustworthy. But some, oh me." Jake frowned but didn't press further. He'd learned enough about Kilira to know she wasn't the type to share more than necessary. "All right," he said, turning to the console. "Where do I start?" Kilira gestured to a section of the control panel, her movements precise despite her fatigue. "Recalibrate, frequency array. Align, power conduits. Jake stared at the controls, feeling like a toddler handed the schematics for a space shuttle. "You're gonna have to walk me through this." Kilira's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "Focus, on center module. Use, interface tool." Jake picked up a small device from the console, a sleek, pen-like instrument that hummed with energy. Following Kilira's instructions, he carefully adjusted the array, aligning the glowing nodes until they pulsed in unison. As he worked, Kilira's voice grew stronger, her guidance steady and precise. Despite the alien technology, Jake found himself falling into a rhythm, his natural aptitude for mechanics kicking in. Finally, the console emitted a soft chime, and a new holographic display appeared, showing a network of interconnected points. "Array, online," Kilira said, her satisfaction evident. Jake grinned. "Looks like we make a pretty good team." Before Kilira could respond, a sharp beep cut through the air. The holographic display shifted, showing an incoming signal. Kilira's expression darkened. "Zelarn frequency." Jake tensed. "What are they saying?" Kilira activated the translator, her face grim as the guttural alien language filled the room. "Survivors, reporting. Requesting reinforcements," she translated. Her gaze met Jake's, her glowing eyes filled with urgency. "We have little time." Jake swallowed hard. "Then let's hope your allies show up fast." Kilira leaned forward, her fingers flying over the console. "Sending, distress signal. Encrypting, coordinates." As she worked, Jake couldn't shake the sense of impending doom. The Zelarn weren't just hunting Kilira, they were escalating, and Earth was caught in the crossfire. "Your allies," he said, his voice low. "Can we trust them to help us? To not make things worse?" Kilira hesitated, her hands stilling briefly on the console. "Some seek honor. Others, opportunity. But they fear the Zelarn. They will come." Jake nodded, though her words didn't entirely ease his worries. "Then let's make sure we're ready when they do." Hours passed in a blur of activity. Kilira focused on refining the ship's systems, while Jake scavenged supplies from his workshop and reinforced the perimeter. The pulse weapon they'd rigged earlier proved invaluable, allowing them to disable and repurpose the Zelarn's tech. As they worked, a strange camaraderie developed between them. Kilira's stoic determination matched Jake's stubborn resolve, and they found an unspoken rhythm in their efforts. By the time the sun began to rise, the ship was nearly operational, its systems humming with renewed energy. Jake leaned against the hull, wiping sweat from his brow. "Not bad for a guy who's never seen an alien before yesterday." Kilira nodded, her expression softening. "You surprise me, Earthman." Jake chuckled. "You're not so bad yourself, warrior princess." Their moment of levity was interrupted by a sudden alert from the ship. The holographic display pulsed red, and a series of symbols flashed across the console. Kilira's expression hardened. "Zelarn fleet, inbound." Jake's stomach dropped. "How many?" Kilira's fingers danced over the controls. 2 ships. Small, but armed." Jake gripped the pulse weapon tightly, his jaw clenching. "Then we'd better make sure your ship's ready to fight." Kilira's eyes met his, a glimmer of determination in their glowing depths. "Together, we will stand." Jake nodded, his fear replaced by a steely resolve. "Damn right we will." As the Zelarn ships entered the atmosphere, Jake and Kilira prepared for the next battle. This time, they weren't just defending a ship, they were fighting for survival, for each other, and for a chance to turn the tide against an enemy far greater than either of them had imagined. The Zelarn ships pierced the morning sky like dark harbingers of doom. Their sleek, angular designs reflected the sunlight as they descended toward Jake's property, flanked by trails of exhaust and shimmering plasma fields. The calm of the sunrise was obliterated by the ominous hum of their engines and the occasional hiss of static as their weapons charged. Jake stood outside the ship, pulse weapon clutched tightly in his hands. His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to focus. The Zeelarn weren't just coming for Kilira, they were bringing the fight to his home. Inside the ship, Kilira's fingers moved across the console with the precision of a veteran. The ship's weapon systems roared to life, energy cannons pivoting toward the incoming threat. 2 ships. Coordinated attack, Kilira called out through the translator. Her voice was strong, but there was an edge of urgency. Jake glanced at her through the open hatch. What's the plan? Kilira's glowing eyes met his. Delay them. Reinforcements, incoming. Jake's brow furrowed. How long? Kilira hesitated. Unknown. Jake cursed under his breath. All right. We hold the line. You keep the guns hot, and I'll do what I can from out here. Kilira didn't argue, instead focusing on optimizing the ship's targeting systems. Jake sprinted to a makeshift barricade he'd built overnight from scrap metal and alien debris. The pulse weapon hummed in his grip, its improvised circuitry glowing faintly. The first Zeelarn ship unleashed a barrage of plasma bolts, each one slamming into the ship's shields with a deafening crackle. The protective field shimmered but held firm. Kilira's voice crackled through Jake's communicator. Shield stable. Returning fire. Energy cannons on the ship roared to life, firing bolts of searing light at the nearest Zeelarn craft. One shot grazed its hull, leaving a glowing scar, but the ship twisted nimbly, avoiding a direct hit. The second Zeelarn ship veered off, circling wide and descending lower. Jake's pulse weapon beeped as he locked onto it. He fired, sending a burst of energy toward the craft. The shot struck its underside, causing it to wobble momentarily before correcting its course. That got their attention, Jake muttered. The ship retaliated, firing a salvo of plasma bolts toward his position. He dove behind the barricade, the heat from the blasts singing his skin. Kilira's voice broke through the chaos. Their shields, not impenetrable. Focus fire. Jake peeked over the edge of the barricade. The first Zeelarn ship was circling back toward the yard, its weapons charging. Kilira's ship fired again, this time landing a direct hit on its engines. The craft lurched, smoke trailing from its rear as it struggled to stabilize. Yes! Jake shouted. But the victory was short-lived. The second ship unleashed a volley of missiles, each one arcing toward Kilira's ship. The shields absorbed the first few, but the impacts grew stronger, causing the field to flicker. Shields, weakening, Kilira warned. Jake gritted his teeth. We've got to take one of them out, now. Kilira didn't respond, but the ship's cannons fired with renewed intensity, targeting the damaged Zeelarn craft. This time, the shots were precise, punching through its shields and tearing into its hull. The ship exploded in a brilliant fireball, sending debris raining down on the field. One down, Kilira said, her tone resolute. The remaining Zeelarn ship, however, seemed unfazed. It accelerated, circling the yard like a predator. Jake could feel its pilot's intent, a calculated, unrelenting determination to finish what they'd started. We're sitting ducks out here, Jake said, watching as the ship prepared another attack run. Kilira's voice was steady. New tactic. Draw them closer. Jake frowned. You want them to come to us? Yes. Their overconfidence, weakness. Jake couldn't argue with her logic, even if it felt like inviting disaster. He stepped out from the barricade, waving his arms and shouting at the craft. Hey! Over here, you ugly tin can! The ship shifted, its weapons locking onto him. Jake ran, zigzagging across the yard as plasma bolts scorched the ground around him. He could hear Kilira's ship repositioning, its cannons tracking the Zeelarn. Closer, closer, Kilira muttered. The Zeelarn ship dipped lower, its underside exposed. Kilira fired, the energy bolts slamming into its shields. They held for a moment before collapsing, and the next shot struck the craft's hull with a thunderous explosion. The ship spiraled out of control, crashing into the far side of the yard with a deafening roar. Flames and smoke erupted from the wreckage, and for a moment, all was still. Jake collapsed to his knees, his pulse weapon slipping from his grasp. His chest heaved as he struggled to catch his breath. "We did it," he whispered. Kilira emerged from the ship, her movement still slow but deliberate. She approached Jake, her glowing eyes scanning the wreckage. "They will send more," she said. Jake groaned. "Can't we have 5 minutes to celebrate?" Kilira's lips twitched in a faint smile. "You fought well, again." Jake managed a weak laugh. "Thanks. You weren't too shabby yourself." Before either of them could say more, a new sound filled the air, a deep, resonant hum that sent shivers down Jake's spine. Kilira's expression darkened. "Reinforcements." Jake stared at her. "The Zelarn?" Kilira shook her head, her eyes narrowing. "My allies." From the sky, a massive ship descended, its design vastly different from the Zelarn's. It was larger, more ornate, with glowing blue veins running along its hull. As it landed, a ramp extended, and a group of armored figures emerged. The leaders stepped forward, their armor gleaming in the sunlight. They removed their helmet, revealing a face that was both alien and regal, with sharp features and glowing blue eyes. Kilira straightened, her posture stiff. "Elder Commander Tavok," she said, her tone formal. The Elder Commander studied Kilira before turning to Jake. "You are the human who aided our warrior?" Jake nodded, suddenly feeling very small under Tavok's piercing gaze. "Yeah, that's me." Tavok inclined his head. "You have earned our respect. But this conflict is far from over." Kilira stepped forward. "The Zelarn, grow bold. We must act." Tavok nodded. "Then let us prepare. Together." Jake exchanged a glance with Kilira, a mix of exhaustion and determination in their expressions. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, they weren't fighting alone. The towering figures of the alien reinforcements moved with practiced precision, their ornate armor glinting in the morning light. The tension was palpable as Jake stood among them, an awkward but determined human in a sea of extraterrestrial warriors. Elder Commander Tavok, the leader of Kilira's allies, examined the wreckage of the Zelarn ships with a critical eye. His expression betrayed neither triumph nor relief, only cold calculation. "This was a scouting party," Tavok said, his voice deep and resonant. "A taste of what's to come." Jake frowned. "How much worse can it get?" Tavok turned to him, his glowing eyes narrowing. "The Zelarn do not merely conquer. They consume. Entire systems reduced to ash. They will send their fleets next." Jake's stomach churned. "Great. So we're looking at full-on annihilation." Kilira stepped forward, her posture firm despite her injuries. "We have time to prepare. Their reinforcements will not arrive immediately." Tavok nodded. "We will use this time wisely. Your ship, Warrior Kilira, is damaged but salvageable. Its weaponry will be key in holding the line." Kilira inclined her head. "Understood, Elder Commander." Jake crossed his arms. "And what about Earth? We're not exactly bristling with defenses. How do we stop a fleet from wiping us out?" Tavok regarded him with a faint smile, a rare crack in his stoic demeanor. "Humans are resourceful. You have already proven that." Jake scoffed. "Flattery's nice, but it won't stop a plasma cannon." Kilira placed a hand on his shoulder. "You will not stand alone, Jake. My people have technology, resources your world can use. We will share them." Jake looked between Kilira and Tavok. "All right, then. Let's figure out how to turn this yard into a fortress. The defense plan." Over the next few days, the yard became a hive of activity. Tavok's warriors unloaded advanced technology from their ship, setting up defensive emplacements, shield generators, and automated turrets. Kilira's ship was repaired and retrofitted, its weapon systems enhanced with input from Tavok's engineers. Jake worked alongside them, learning as much as he could about their technology. The pulse weapon he'd cobbled together was upgraded with alien components, giving it more power and accuracy. Despite the grim circumstances, Jake found himself marveling at the collaboration between humans and aliens. He even managed to bond with some of Tavok's warriors, who seemed intrigued by his ingenuity and determination. One evening, as Jake adjusted the alignment of a turret, Kilira approached him. Her injuries had healed remarkably fast, thanks to her species' regenerative abilities. "You've adapted quickly," she said, watching him work. Jake grinned. "Necessity's a great motivator. Besides, it's not every day you get to learn from aliens." Kilira's expression softened. "You have earned my respect, Jake. Few would have stood beside me as you have." Jake felt a warmth rise in his chest. "Thanks, Kilira. That means a lot. But I couldn't have done any of this without you." Kilira's gaze lingered on him for a moment before she turned toward the horizon. "The Zelarn will come soon. When they do, we must be ready." Jake nodded. "We will be." A sudden warning. The calm was shattered the next morning by the blare of an alarm. Tavok's warriors scrambled as holographic displays flared to life, showing a massive Zelarn fleet emerging from hyperspace. Jake stared at the projections, his heart sinking. There were dozens of ships, ranging from sleek fighters to hulking carriers. "They're not wasting any time," he muttered. Tavok stepped forward, his voice commanding. "Warriors, prepare for battle. Activate the planetary shield grid. Ensure all weapons are operational." Kilira joined him at the console. "They will attempt to disable the shield first. We must hold the line until reinforcements arrive." Jake felt a pang of frustration. "Reinforcements? You mean your people? Where the hell are they?" "They are coming," Tavok said, his tone firm. "But we cannot rely on them alone. We must hold." Jake clenched his fists. "All right, then. Let's give these bastards a fight they'll never forget." The battle begins. The Zelarn fleet descended like a swarm of locusts, their ship spreading out to encircle the area. Plasma bolts rained down, slamming into the planetary shield with thunderous force. Inside the control center, Kilira monitored the shield's integrity. "Holding at 80%, she reported. Redirecting power to reinforce weak points." Tavok's warriors manned the turrets and other defensive systems, firing coordinated volleys at the incoming ships. The energy cannons on Kilira's ship roared to life, blasting through Zelarn fighters with deadly precision. Jake took up position at one of the turrets, his upgraded pulse weapon at his side. He aimed carefully, firing bursts of energy that shredded the shields of an approaching fighter. "One down," he shouted, a surge of adrenaline coursing through him. Kilira's voice crackled through his communicator. "Focus fire on the carriers. They're deploying ground troops." Jake cursed under his breath. Because this wasn't hard enough already. Ground assault. As the battle raged in the skies, Zelarn dropships broke through the shield and landed on the outskirts of the yard. Armored soldiers poured out, their weapons blazing as they advanced. Jake joined a group of Tavok's warriors on the ground, using his pulse weapon to take down the invaders. The air was thick with the sound of gunfire, explosions, and alien roars. Kilira fought alongside him, her movements graceful and deadly. Her energy blades hummed as she cut through the enemy ranks, her combat prowess unmatched. "We can't let them reach the shield generator," she shouted. Jake nodded, firing at a group of Zelarn soldiers trying to flank their position. The upgraded weapon packed a punch, disintegrating their shields and sending them sprawling. Despite their efforts, the Zealarn continued to press forward. Jake's muscles burned, and his ears rang from the constant noise. But he refused to back down. "We need reinforcements," he yelled into his communicator. Tavok's voice came through, calm but strained. "Hold your position. Help is on the way." A glimmer of hope. Just as the Zealarn seemed poised to overwhelm them, a new sound filled the air, a deep, resonant hum. Jake looked up to see a fleet of alien ships emerging from hyperspace. Kilira's face lit up with relief. "Our reinforcements." The newcomers wasted no time, their ships tearing into the Zealarn fleet with devastating efficiency. On the ground, more warriors joined the fight, their advanced weapons quickly turning the tide. The Zealarn, realizing they were outmatched, began to retreat. Their ships pulled back, disappearing into hyperspace as quickly as they had arrived. Jake collapsed to the ground, his pulse weapon slipping from his grasp. He was exhausted, bruised, and covered in soot, but he was alive. Kilira knelt beside him, a rare smile on her face. "You fought well, Jake." Again. Jake managed a weak laugh. "You keep saying that, but I'm starting to think you just like seeing me almost die." Kilira chuckled softly. "Perhaps." As the dust settled, Tavok approached, his expression grave but respectful. "You have done your people proud, human. This victory is yours as much as ours." Jake looked at him, then at Kilira. Despite the odds, they had survived. And while the war was far from over, they had proven one thing: together, they were stronger than anyone had expected. The Zealarn retreat left the yard eerily quiet. Smoke hung heavy in the air, mingling with the acrid scent of scorched earth and melted metal. The towering forms of Kilira's reinforcements stood sentinel over the battlefield, their armor gleaming in the dim light. Jake slumped against the barricade, his pulse weapon resting limply in his lap. He watched the skies for any sign of another attack, but they remained clear. Kilira knelt beside him, her glowing eyes studying his face. "You've earned a rest, Jake." He snorted, his voice hoarse. "Rest sounds good. Maybe a week's worth. How about you? You took a beating out there." Kilira's lips curved in a faint smile. "Zealarn do not hold back, even against their own kind. But I am well enough." Tavok approached, his commanding presence impossible to ignore. He looked at Jake with a mixture of respect and curiosity. "Human, you have proven yourself to be more than a bystander in this conflict. Your ingenuity and courage have made a difference." Jake waved a hand dismissively. "I just didn't want them turning my yard into a crater. Besides, I had help." Kilira inclined her head toward him, a silent acknowledgement of his modesty. Tavok turned to address the gathered warriors. His voice carried across the battlefield like a resonant drum. "This day marks more than a victory. It is a testament to what can be achieved when strength is forged through unity. The Zealarn have underestimated us, and that will be their undoing." A chorus of alien voices responded, their tones fierce and resolute. Building alliances. With the immediate threat neutralized, the next phase of the plan began. Tavok's forces, now reinforced by additional ships and supplies, worked tirelessly to establish a defensive perimeter around the yard. Jake, despite his exhaustion, threw himself into the effort. He coordinated with Kilira and the engineers, helping integrate the alien technology into a makeshift command center. Every piece of equipment, every shield generator, was another step toward ensuring Earth's survival. Kilira found Jake late one evening, sitting on the hood of his truck and staring at the stars. The yard was illuminated by the soft glow of alien devices, creating an otherworldly atmosphere. "You seem lost in thought," she said, climbing up to sit beside him. Jake sighed. "Just thinking about how crazy all of this is. A few days ago, I was fixing tractors and worrying about bills. Now I'm fighting aliens and setting up defenses for a planet." Kilira's expression softened. You have adapted remarkably. Many would have faltered under such circumstances. Jake chuckled. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just too stubborn to quit. Kilira tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. That stubbornness may be your greatest strength. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared experiences settling between them. What happens next? Jake asked finally. Kilira's gaze turned toward the horizon. The Zelarn will not stop. They will regroup, and they will come again. But we will be ready. A message to humanity. As the days passed, it became clear that Earth's isolation was no longer an option. Tavok insisted that humanity be prepared for the broader galactic stage, both the dangers and the opportunities it presented. A meeting was arranged with Earth's leaders. Kilira's ship, now fully operational, served as the venue. Tavok, Kilira, and Jake stood side by side as a holographic broadcast was transmitted to governments across the planet. Tavok spoke first, his voice steady and commanding. People of Earth, I am Elder Commander Tavok of the Anzur Dominion. Your world is no longer hidden from the galaxy. The Zelarn Empire seeks to conquer and destroy, but they will find no easy prey here. Kilira stepped forward, her tone measured but firm. Your resilience and ingenuity have already proven that humanity is a force to be reckoned with. But this is only the beginning. To stand against the Zelarn, we must work together. Jake took a deep breath before speaking. I'm just a guy with a yard full of alien tech. But I've seen what happens when we fight back, when we refuse to give up. The Zelarn might think they can steamroll us, but they don't know what they're up against. The broadcast ended with a call for unity, urging humanity to set aside their divisions and prepare for the challenges ahead. The calm before the storm. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Earth's governments began to cooperate with the Anzur forces, pooling resources to strengthen planetary defenses. Alien engineers shared advanced technology, while Earth's scientists worked tirelessly to understand and replicate it. Jake found himself acting as an unlikely bridge between the two groups. His down-to-earth perspective and first-hand experience made him an invaluable liaison. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake found Kilira standing alone near the edge of the yard. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, walking up beside her. Kilira glanced at him, her expression contemplative. "I was thinking of home. Of the battles I fought before coming here." Jake nodded. "Must be hard, being so far away." Kilira's gaze softened. "It is. But I have found something here, something worth protecting." Jake felt a warmth spread through his chest. "We're lucky to have you, Kilira. Couldn't have done any of this without you." She smiled faintly. "And I, without you." The road ahead. The first hints of dawn painted the sky as Tavok's fleet prepared for its next mission. A Zelarn stronghold had been identified, and the Anzur were determined to strike before the enemy could regroup. Jake watched as Kilira boarded her ship, her armor gleaming in the morning light. She paused at the top of the ramp, turning to face him. "Will you be all right?" she asked. Jake grinned. "I'll manage. Someone's got to keep these defenses running while you're out there saving the galaxy." Kilira nodded, a rare warmth in her expression. "Until we meet again, Jake." The ship's engines roared to life, lifting off with a rush of air. Jake shielded his eyes as it ascended, disappearing into the clouds. He stood there for a long moment, watching the sky. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, he felt a spark of hope, a belief that, together, they could turn the tide. The Zelarn had underestimated Earth. And with allies like Kilira and the Anzur, Jake was determined to show them just how wrong they were. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. For more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon, so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.